Boom! I'm Julian.
And I'm Caril.
Welcome to the late night rap. Caril, go on.
Another day in paradise. It's good to be alive, isn't it?
All right, cooler, Caril. Boy, Caril, we have a lot to discuss today, a lot. Bob Marley, over 30 years ago, said in one of his hit records, and Caril, you have to help me with this now, right?
So
Bob
much
Marley
trouble in the world.
That's right. You see men sailing on their ego trips.
Blast off on their spaceships, million miles from reality. No care for you, no care for me. So
That is
much
right,
trouble in
Caril.
the world.
So much trouble, Caril. Caril, the geopolitical tension across the world continues to escalate. And Jamaica is not immune from this, right? Or immune from the impact of this. I mean, 2 weeks ago, not even 2 weeks, just over a week ago, we saw, where, Jamaica discontinued the Cuban medical program, right? Just this week on Thursday, we saw gas prices jump to, increase by $5, right? Which is a huge jump, and that's directly arising from the situation in the Middle East right now. And even as I think we can call it war now, even as the war in the Middle East escalates, we see where the US president has signaled that he's open to taking action. He called it a friendly takeover, right? And he said maybe or maybe not. In Cuba, which is our neighbor, right?
Cuba is next.
That's right. Right? That's what he said. And
Those were his words.
yeah, and of course, this is no doubt will likely have implications for us beyond just security. So here to help us discuss this issue is former Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Honorable Portia Simpson Miller administration, Mr. Arnaldo Brown. Arnaldo, boy, it's an honor having you on the late night rap.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Good night to both of you, and good night to your listeners
Yes.
and viewers.
Yeah, man. Thank you for joining. So, I mean, my first question to you is, obviously, any intervention in Cuba will likely have an impact on Jamaican security context. What's your reaction to that? Your general reaction to what's taking place right now and the possible implications it can have on Jamaica?
Well, I once said that history repeats itself, and I was corrected by the erstwhile Professor Miller, and he has a different thesis. He's saying that history is not cyclical, but certainly there are many parallels, historical parallels. One of the important thing is that this President Trump, has reinvoked I think it's 1823, you can correct me on the date if I'm wrong, Monroe Doctrine, and has added the Trump corollary to that doctrine. And he has made it very clear that it is the intention of the United States of America to exercise its dominance in the Western Hemisphere, particularly in the Americas. And that came on the heels of the removal of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela as president. Now, persons have been talking about a regime change in Venezuela. And broadly speaking, that may be so. But what has really happened in Venezuela is the removal of the president of Venezuela, and his regime essentially under his vice president continues in place. And we have seen in recent days uh, attack now taking place on Iran. The Israel-America war with Iran is now going on, and of course, in the wake of his removal of the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, the president himself had named a number of countries in this hemisphere, namely Mexico, Colombia, and Cuba, of a similar intervention. So the long run up really was just to set the historical context. That the intervention of the United States, certainly in the Americas, is not something that is new. What may be new is the unvarnished way in which it is being done. So, for instance, in the lead up to the takeout of Maduro, we recognize that the US military conducted some operations in Caribbean water using lethal force, saying that they were intercepting or interdicting drug traffickers. And that, of course, has implications in terms of international human rights law, international common law, and international law generally. And I believe is a matter that the US Congress itself will take up. And we have seen where Trinidadian nationals have sued the US government for two of its nationals were killed in that particular instance. We also know historically that the US had occupied Cuba, and it is that occupation that led to the Cuban Revolution, where Fidel Castro came to power, I believe, in 1953, thereabout, and has maintained control over Cuba. Not necessarily Fidel, because they are now dead. Fidel is dead, his brother is out, but the revolution lives on. And it is instructive to note that the holder of probably the third highest office in the United States government, who could become president of the United States, is of Cuban descent. And therefore, the issue of targeting Cuba is now firmly on the table. And we saw where when our prime minister here made a statement about the Cuban state, that he was sharply criticized and threatened by a Cuban congressman, that sanctions are likely to be imposed, or some consequences would be brought to bear because of that statement. And in fact, that congressman was reminding the prime minister of his perspective that Cuba had worked against the GLP administration back in the 1970s and so on. And it is not surprising that in the late early 80s, when the Cold War was at its zenith, that it was a JLP administration essentially that had declared the then ambassador persona non grata, and with that, the Cuban health program had gone. Now, what is clear to me is that the US, in seeking to justify its uh, activities, usually put forward some arguments. So in the case of Maduro, they said he was drug trafficking, was a narco kingpin. None of that has been established by any fact. And in fact, when you look at the information available, Venezuela has not exported any hard drugs to the United States. And if it does, it is negligible. So those charges were not valid charges. Similarly, the Cuban healthcare program has been labeled by the United States as human trafficking. They accuse the Cuban administration of withholding travel documents and not paying doctors directly. And this is what has been used to attack that program. And in the case of Jamaica, that program has been 50 years uh, old. Now, let's put that into perspective, it seems to be that the Cuban government has been able to sustain itself financially through the program where Cuban doctors and nurses, medical professionals travel outside. And it is not strange because in Jamaica, we have Jamaicans who travel outside, they send back remittances to Jamaica. Granted, those remittances do not come directly to the state, but the state benefits from that remittance. So the idea that this is human trafficking requires some more interrogation. But from my vantage point, I'd hazard to say that it is part of the narrative developed to undermine and to cut off the resources that are available to the Cuban people. Now, one of the other things that is important in part of this narrative is that the US will tell you that they are doing this on behalf of the people of these countries. They are doing it on behalf of the people of Venezuela. They are doing it on behalf of the people of Cuba. They are doing it on behalf of the people of Iran. But invariably, it is those people who are suffering, not the Cuban administration, because the
Good
Cuban
point.
administration has been able to survive the Venezuelan administration, the Venezuelan regime is very much intact, except for Maduro, who has been the head of it. They took out the Ayatollah in Iran, but yet still that regime is still very much in place. So the idea that they are doing this in the name of the people of these countries is not an idea that is sound. And when we look at the
Um,
broad sweep of
Arnaldo, I want
history,
to ask you a question, right? But where a lot of Jamaicans are asking the same question. Now, with the ending of the medical program, which came on the heels of Congressman Jimenez threatening that
yes,
Jamaica will pay dearly or face the consequences of the Prime Minister's speech at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting when he um, said he would empathize with the suffering of the Cuban people and whatever we could do to help the people, even though he said ideologically they were poles apart. And we see the ending of a 50-year program, which already reports are suggesting that there is a major fallout in the health sector, in the hospitals. Patients are being turned away. We're seeing things coming up. And Jamaica's health system was already not on steady footing. Do you think that while we are not in a position as a country to say, get thee behind me, America, and allow me to handle my business myself and look after the health of my people, we can't say that we're not in an economic and military, and no, we are in no position at all to stand up to them. Do you think, though, that the government could have negotiated better rather than bow, genuflect, end the program to appease our more powerful neighbors to the south and say, look, if we end this program, there's going to be a serious shortfall. There's going to be problems in my health sector because the Cuban doctors who are here have been doing a great job, and there's going to be a vacuum. Are you prepared to help us fill this vacuum so that there will be no fallout on the health aspect of our economy and our people, rather than just bow and genuflect? We know we couldn't do a Michael Manley and say, leave me alone, let me handle my business. At this point in world affairs, we are not in a position to do that. That is not in question. But maybe you think we could have negotiated with put it the bottom on them than we and say, them boss, if me
well,
do this is gonna happen. What can you do since you are demanding that I end this thing? How can you help me to make up for the breach that is bound to happen?
Good question.
well, in response to you, I don't know if you have seen it, but the government did put out a statement seeking to contextualize why the program ended. And they are making the argument that attempted to negotiate with the Cubans some aspects of the program that apparently would fit into the concerns that the United States has raised. And I think that statement that they have put out has raised more questions than it has provided answers.
Exactly.
And chief among them is the issue of the documentation of the Cubans in terms of their travel documents, uh, the pay of the Cubans, and those points are disputed, quite frankly, because it would be surprising to know that you had this arrangement for 50 years and you are just now discovering that these are elements of the agreement.
Thank you very
Now,
much.
now, what is curious is that the government can point to the 1976 and say this agreement comes from 1976 because since 2016 they would have had charge of the reins of government, and I'm sure the contract would have come up for renewal. So therefore, uh, they in my view should have been a little bit more proactive
In other words,
in
if you're going to
relation.
re-sign a contract, you must read it.
Yeah,
You're not
yes,
going to just
right.
put the
They should.
signature. You're not going to put
They-
your signature, which represent 3 million people, to something where you never read.
yes,
And you have big
they should
politician,
have
you have
been.
big minister of health, you have big prime minister. That doesn't compute.
They should have been more proactive. Now, you ask a very important question, and that is what engagement has been made, because it seems to me, just by optics, I can't go any further than that. Just by optics, that there's a fairly decent rapport between Rubio and Holness. So I don't know if it is that they have engaged them through back channels to say to them that, look, there are 277 Cuban healthcare workers in our sector, and the termination of this program is going to put at risk the Jamaica healthcare system. And therefore, if anything, ask for a carve out or ask for more time to make whatever adjustments they view that might be necessary in the circumstances. But I think what was happening is that they might have calculated, and this is me just speculating now as a private citizen, they might have calculated that the Cubans would have remained in place, and certainly not pull the plug immediately if there was no accommodation that was possible, and that is not turning out to be the case. And one cannot fault the Cubans for that, because this is a continued sustained attack on them. Because remember, that the embargo has been dragging on now for over 50 years. There was some rapprochement when Obama was president, but this president has gone all the way back and has tightened the grip on Cuba. And I suspect collaterally, if not deliberately, because it became more difficult when they went in and took out Maduro. So the energy supply to Cuba automatically got cut right there, and there was a problem. And then added to that, they are now targeting the Cuban healthcare program because it's a significant pipeline of funding for the Cuban people, not just the government, but the people of Cuba. And to attack that program is creating a lot of collateral damage, as we have seen. Because in the case of Jamaica, it is taking out 277 healthcare workers. And now the government has to be scrambling to look to Ghana, to look to Nigeria, to replace that. And there's a logistic issue in there. How quickly are they going to come here? Cuba is near shore. Cuba is 90 minutes off the coast of,
Well,
of Jamaica.
I left Jamaica and I went to Africa, and that's 26 hours worth of flight
Mm-hmm.
of travel time,
Exactly, right?
right?
So that is going to think. So I mean, to come back directly to your point, I think that there is still space for negotiations and diplomacy, not just in relation to Cuba and Jamaica, but in relation to Cuba and the United States of America. And I think that that dialogue needs to be intensified. There are some people who have the view that traditional diplomacy does not work with Trump. I don't know. But the reality of the situation is that you have to find some opening, some avenue where he can be engaged, given the significance of this particular program
Well,
to Jamaica. And then,
I want to cut you right there, sir. Well, to me, even though the president is the man who seems to be the puppet master, I think this particular targeting of Cuba is more a Rubio initiative
Mm-hmm.
rather
than
I mean,
one
that,
that
again,
the president
again,
has direct interest in. I think this is a
I,
Rubio initiative.
well,
That's how it
again,
appears to me.
the
And
point
I want to
is,
say another thing again now. You see, we're looking to Ghana, or we're looking to Nigeria. But it's not Ghana and Nigeria, on the face of it, how it looks, made this demand on us.
no, they
So
didn't
the
make the
people who
demand,
made
but
this demand on us,
no, they didn't make the demand. But the reality of the
they made an
situation is
order.
that in the
They gave us an
in
order.
in the in the fallout in the health sector, you do have to find replacement. That is really the point that is being made, because the only other option you have is to approach the US government itself and to negotiate with them. But I think that is going to be a difficult task, because the reality of the situation is that we can see the posture of the US in relation to Cuba as being very hawkish. So I'm not sure that you're really going to have a lot of space for flexibility. And you made a point earlier, which I have to highlight, that the plug, it may be coincidental, but the plug was pulled in the wake of the threat coming from the congressman who is also of Cuban descent. So
Heritage,
we don't
yes.
know, we don't know if this is an appeasement. I don't know. um, but the timing of it is very curious.
I, I,
And as I'm saying, and I'll say, I'll make this final point. Even though Trump is, you know, unconventional, there's still room, I believe, for engagement and dialogue. And I think that the Jamaican government should press in that direction and engage the Secretary of State. This is the point I was making earlier,
but if
that there seems to be a rapport
Arnaldo,
between
Arnaldo and
US and
Julia,
Rome.
have you seen reports that the St. Lucian Prime Minister has flatly rejected those demands, the same demands that were being made of us, that have been made of us, that we have genuflected to? He has said, look here, I'm not doing it, because health and the health security of my people come first. Have you seen that?
No, I
I've,
personally haven't seen that.
I've,
But what? Go ahead.
yeah, man, I haven't seen it, Carol, but what are the implications of it? That's the problem, right?
But
I
even
mean,
before we go there,
we know it with I mean,
even,
we saw in the 1970s where a former prime minister essentially stood up to the Americans, and what happened to us, right?
well, you see,
Eat
and
what,
let me
you
make
grow
this
and grow
broader
what you
point.
eat.
Hold on, let me make this broader point, because that point has been brought up,
Mm-hmm.
and I see a certain colleague of mine making a statement that what obtains in the 70s cannot obtain now in this present dispensation. That in the 70s it appears that the leaders then were prepared, even though there was aggression, even though there was a Cold War, that those leaders were more um, open to dialogue, questions of principle, and so on. We may not have that in this particular period, but I would say that there is still the the need, and still the prudence in engaging in dialogue, even though the person to whom it is directed may not seem moved by that. I don't believe that persons cannot be reached. I don't hold that belief, nor do I accept that because we are now in probably a different dispensation, we should not seek to defend and articulate what is in our best interest. I say this in the context of the danger of the region falling into a sort of satellite state arrangement if we are not careful. Because what is really at risk here is sovereignty. That is really what is at risk. And if we are afraid to agitate, to negotiate, to push back, then you may capitulate and ultimately you may become a satellite, right?
I got you. So,
And there's a real danger in that.
You know, I
for
don't want to use certain terms. You may ultimately become the B word.
all right, but I hear that. All right, but against that background, Arnaldo, right? If the situation with Cuba escalates, right, and the military intervention is being pursued, what position is Jamaica expected to take at the United
Well,
Nations?
you know, I know that leaders in the region have been promoting the region as a zone of peace. And I think that advocacy must continue, that we should discourage military intervention in countries in this region. And this is one of the reasons why the activities in Venezuela should not have been ignored. And that whilst no one necessarily is defending Maduro himself, the principles are important. The principles of international law, the principles of international common law that provides heads of state with some degree of immunity from activities of this nature. And I feel, I mean, let's be clear. Maduro is not the first, because we had Noriega, we had Aristide in Haiti. Now we have Maduro, and there are others. Some would have been probably assassinated and so on, right? So this is not a new phenomenon, and therefore we can't recoil or retreat in terms of our diplomacy and our advocacy. And if anything, it is now that our voices must be louder, not softened, not backing into a corner, but more deliberate, more measured, and seeking to get to the channels of power and to those persons who might be moderates in an administration where people may view that it is not listening to anybody at all. There must be some way that you can reach some person. Now, as to where Jamaica will stand if there is any movement towards Cuba, that is left to be seen, because already the capitulation in relation to the Cuban professional program, health professional program, one could say is an indication. But again, you could take this statement of the Prime Minister, the recent heads of government, where he did say that, we should treat with Cuba in a particular type of way, and that is not military intervention.
Yes.
What is good at this time is that the US currently now is distracted in Iran. We don't know how long that is going to drag on for. And I believe that during this period, whilst they are distracted, some diplomatic channels should be open to seek to prevent any further incursion on sovereign states in this region. Since the US is talking about hegemony here, they should have an interest in making this a zone of peace. And I think that is the main argument that should be advanced, that
Ah,
we keep this region as a zone of peace. Any differences that we have, we go through the channels that are available. You have the OAS. The president has now established the Shield of Americas, right? Jamaica is part of that process, even though the Prime Minister wasn't on the stage. His minister, Ambassador Marks, was present. She signed that document on behalf of Jamaica.
All right, Arnaldo, a former state minister of foreign affairs. You are familiar with the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, are you, Mr. Brown?
So,
All
yeah,
right.
man, to some extent.
And the second question is Cuba and Haiti a part of CARICOM?
No.
All right. So
No, Cuba definitely is not part of CARICOM. Haiti is a member, and if not a
Associate member, yeah.
all right. So when we have this thing about free movement across it's not across the Caribbean, it's across CARICOM, is that it?
that is correct.
That's that's one of the pillars of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, is it?
The Treaty of Chaguaramas does not apply to Cuba,
Cuba.
right? It doesn't.
All right.
And
Because
free movement
it's
does
a
not
good thing
apply
you
to
clarify
all
that for me,
CARICOM
because it
parties
does
that are part of the
involve
Treaty
free
of
movement
Chaguaramas, and
of
therefore it does
CARICOM
not apply to
nationals, does it not?
it doesn't apply to Haiti. It doesn't apply to Cuba, because Cuba is not part of CARICOM.
Oh boy. That does further show cold water on any effort that we could use to defend it legally, to say, well, this is how we move in the Caribbean. And
Just a quick question. Because you spoke about the multilateral system under threat. And I'm assuming does this include CARICOM? Because we're seeing right now where there's a split within the region, right? And to be honest with you, I've heard people talking about repeating Mr. Williams's quote from back in the days. 1 minus 10 equals naught, right? So I hear a lot of that rhetoric coming up because of this recent, this geopolitical situation in the region. Do you think that the future existence of CARICOM is under threat based on what's going on?
Right, is that elections have consequences, and I believe what we're seeing here is a lot of personality issues. So yes, Trinidad and Tobago has obviously made its position clear that it is standing with the US, and not so much with CARICOM. Guyana, less so, but clearly Guyana has its interest, because remember now, the Maduro administration was hostile to the territorial integrity of Guyana, and therefore they would find themselves naturally aligned to the United States in terms of securing their borders against a would-be hostile neighbor. And it brings rise to the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So in other words, and what persons will try to define this as is pragmatism. So people are narrowing their focus, and they're looking at what is in my best interest. We have seen the return of Kamala in Trinidad and Tobago, and she has not made any apologies about the fact that she's firmly in support of the United States.
On the earth.
She has publicly criticized CARICOM and the position CARICOM has taken. And as I've said, for Guyana, whilst they have not as been strident as Kamala has been, it is clear that they would see themselves more aligned to the United States, having regard to the threat that Venezuela under Maduro poses to their geographic integrity. So we are in a period where I would say the multilateral system, including CARICOM, is under some amount of stress. And at the recent heads of government, the Prime Minister of Jamaica did make the statement that we are not a political union. And therefore, because we're not a political union, countries are going to be at liberty to make decisions that they believe are in their national interest, and therein lies the challenge. Because whilst that may be true, it is easier to pick us off one by one. So on the issue of accepting persons who don't come from the region who are being deported from the United States, we see that countries are doing that because they are not coming together as a collective to say to the United States that, look, this is not in our best interest to accept third party people in our country. And the
Uh,
reason why they're doing that is because they're fearful that the US may impose visa restrictions on them or other restrictions on them that could be damaging to their economies and to their
Arnaldo,
societies.
Arnaldo,
Yes.
before you go into, you say you have to wrap it up, but I want to ask you this thing. I want to put out a little thought when you use the word elections are have consequences, right?
Yeah.
Now, we see where things were relaxed in Cuba after a certain election in the United States. Now we see where it's tightened on Cuba after a certain election in the United States. And based on things that are the current geopolitical situation involving the United States and their leadership and decisions that they are making, it seems with the United States electorate, their chances of securing leadership in another 2.5 years may not be as strong as it was a year and a half ago. Do you think that it may be wise for us, like how we are the weak fence in this thing, to sit and the government may have made a strategic, government of Jamaica may have made a strategic chess move at this point to say, you know what, let's wait it out for another 2.5 years. Let's see what happens on the political scene in America. And then, whatever happens then, we will make our next move after that with people who may be more friendly to this health system that benefits us. And seeing that we can't stand up and fight, maybe we have to run away so we can fight another day. Do you think that's a strategy being employed by some leaders in the Caribbean community?
Yeah. I respond to you in this particular way. We do know that there are cycles in the US. I think there's midterm this year, and therefore
Which not looking good for the Republicans right
we
now.
will see what happens in November, and that will give us a sense of what might come to 2028. And yes, of course, there would be prudence in waiting to see where the wind blows, right? Um, and sometimes, even though there may be a change of administration, there may not be a change of direction. But the fact is that the it may be you may have more open-minded persons, more flexible persons who are inclined to dialogue rather than hostility. And I think that is what we're seeing here now. Uh, and timing, of course, is important. Timing is important. But I will make the point that even in the challenging period that we are facing, there's always room for political dialogue and engagement. There's always room for that. And if we are convinced that a particular course is going to be detrimental to the interest of the country, I think we should make every effort to utilize the channels that are available, including political dialogue, to get our point across and to get a carve out for our situation. And what I would say in closing and in taking my leave, that now more than ever, CARICOM needs to be more coherent and cohesive, and their strength in numbers. And I think the chairman of CARICOM now should seek to rally the troops and to get some coordinated efforts in relation to the region's engagement with the United States at this stage of the game.
Boy, Arnaldo, thank you very much. You are a wealth of knowledge.
Mhm.
And I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed
Yeah.
the intellectual discourse. I'm sure our viewers will too. You have thrown a different perspective, a more nuanced light on the issue for those of us who are not so versed. And it has been a pleasure, sir. It
All right.
has
Thank
been
you
a
for the
pleasure.
invitation. Right.
Thank you,
My
sir.
Thank
pleasure
you
to
for
be
taking
here.
it up. It's an honor and a privilege every time.
All right. All right. We're going to sign
Cheers.
out now. Thank you, Farmer Minister.
Yeah.
Thank you
All
very
the
much.
best.
Yeah, man. We're signing
Yeah,
out.
man. Boom.
Boom. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and make sure you comment. Right? Because
Yeah.
I've had an
God.
insightful discussion.
Remember this, it's a late night rap
Mhm.
where we give you straight facts.
All right.
We enjoy your opinions and respect your opinions. So please leave some comments in the comment section.
Thank
Arnaldo
you.
Brown, big up. And
Go.
we forget to
Respect.
tell them you are a very, very excellent attorney at law. You're not just a politician.
Thank you.
You were first an attorney at law. People need
That
to
is
know
so.
that.